Hi, hello, welcome back. It's me, Devraj. The other day I made a video about the cube of space, and I just wanted to, I finished making the video, and the next day I thought, I could have included that, and I could have done a bit more about that, and I researched a little bit here and there. So I thought I'd make a follow-up video. Maybe there'll be more follow-up videos, who knows? The principal thing I want to say here is I think the cube of space is massively underrated in the Western tradition, particularly as a meditation device. You know, the Western schools emerged from like Eliphas Levi and then the Golden Dawn around the 1880s. And I think essentially it's not too controversial to say that they kind of repurposed a vast amount of Jewish Kabbalah, as it was understood in those days. I don't know to what degree that's ever really been owned. You know, the big emergence of mysticism in the West, in Europe, in the early 17th century, was the furore around Rosicrucianism and the publication, particularly the first two manifestos, Rosicrucian documents, the Fama Fraternitatis and the Confessio Fraternitatis. And my suspicion is that, you know, a lot of the work, a lot of the underlying concepts in those documents, because they're super allegorical, of course, were drawn more from Jewish mysticism than anywhere else. And I would say that, you know, Jewish mysticism, Kabbalah essentially, has had a huge influence on the Western traditions, but that this is not fully owned. I read an excellent book not long ago by Frances Yates, historian, and she wrote a book called The Rosicrucian Enlightenment. It's an awesome book, and it's all about the early Rosicrucian days and the whole historical, political context of the time. But something I felt that was a little bit dubious about the book was that quite a chunk of it was also about how much she felt that John Dee, the Elizabethan English mathematician and occultist, you know, was the guiding force behind the Rosicrucians. That his influence in Europe and the travels he'd made in Prague and stuff like this, you know, had a huge influence. And I rather feel this is a bit of an attempt by Westerners, which is kind of in vogue at the moment, to retrofit themselves into many of their own creations when you look a little more closely, they may be coming from somewhere else. I think a huge influence on the Rosicrucians would have been Yitzhak Luria, the Ari, and the school of Kabbalah, which he founded in the 16th century. And I think one of the areas where this lack of ownership kind of shows in the Western mystery traditions is around things like the cube, which if you look at the main Western mystery schools, the AA, Thelema, Golden Dawn, and all the numerous offshoots of these, because these schools are always splitting, of course, as you do, and only of those schools did Builders of the Adytum pick up the cube. And I think that tracks back a bit to the fact that, you know, the role of Jewish mysticism was not owned early on. And so because, you know, Jewish mysticism itself is an evolving field, particularly because more documents are discovered, more rabbis kind of do interpretations of them, we have a different kind of vision, I would say, of Jewish mysticism now than we did in the time of the Golden Dawn back in the 1880s, 1890s. Now, a counterpoint pushing back to this kind of notion of unknown Jewish influence would be the idea that these schools also had quite a lot of extra-dimensional assistance in their setup. The Golden Dawn famously had these secret chiefs, I think, who were communicating with Wynne and Mathers, whoever. Builders of the Adytum had Master R, believed to be someone who could keep his body at about 40 years of age for hundreds of years, generally regarded as the Comte de Saint-Germain in 18th century France. Dr. Case supposedly met with him in a New York hotel and basically got most of the material for Builders of the Adytum from him. And Thelema, of course, from Liber Al, a document allegedly from an Iwas who channeled it through Aleister Crowley in 1904. So it's not really necessary to completely bang on about the Jewish influence in a kind of frenzied manner, because there is extra-dimensional stuff going on here. But nevertheless, there are times when you can see that certain things have been pushed a little bit too hard and other things left in the background. And to me, the cube of space is one of those, because what we now know about the cube of space is that really it forms the dominant part of the Sefer Yetzirah. Remember last week I was mentioning this, the Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Creation. We don't really know when it was written, probably sometime between 1,000 and 2,000 years ago. This is Aryeh Kaplan translation, which is, I think, pretty well regarded as super awesome and by far the best. And here you'll see, a tree of life glyph here, which is a big part of the Sefer Yetzirah. But also it can't be denied the cube is a huge part of the Sefer Yetzirah. And a particularly interesting thing regarding the cube and the Sefer Yetzirah is that the Hebrew that it was written in, this book, and I'm totally not a Hebrew scholar, so I'm just taking it on the word of those who are, was of a form that there were two ways to interpret the basic text. It could be understood as the act of a creator, he sealed the direction north with Yod, Hey, Vav, or whatever. He sealed the direction south with Hey, Vav, Yod, whatever. However, or it could be taken as an instruction, as an imperative. The tense used, it wasn't really clear, that's my understanding. So it could have been saying, seal the direction north with Yod, Hey, Vav. Seal the direction south with Hey, Vav, Yod. So it could have actually been a guided meditation, basically relating to the cube structure. And I've personally been working intuitively with cube visualizations for a while now. And I think they're super, super useful. And basically what you do, is pretty similar to what you do in the Sefer Yetzirah, which is you sit, in meditation with your eyes closed, imagining you're facing east. You could also face east if you want to. And then you build up in your mind's eye symbols relating to the three axes of the cube, and you place them on the axes. Then you build up the faces of the cube and the inner point. And then you build up the 12 edges of the cube. So this is like a half hour to an hour process, which I found very, very powerful. And to do it, you'll need a set of symbols with 22 symbols in it, which is kind of handy, given that there are 22 Hebrew letters, 22 trumps of the Tarot Major Arcana, and that you could also use a mixture of the 12 astrological signs, the 7 planets, and 3 of the 4 elements, fire, water and air, given that Earth is anyway in the center, it's already present. So you can pick one of these 3 symbol sets, build them up in your mind's eye, build the sign up or build the key up, build the letter up, and then place it in the right place on the cube. And in the Sefer Yetzirah, you it's not super, super clear, but basically you do the axes first, then the faces and the inner point, and then you do the 12 edges. So this is a very powerful meditation, and I see 2 things that I think it fulfills. One is to really ground you in the physical realm and to give you a proper sense of boundaries. If you do follow the Sefer Yetzirah kind of technique, then you do actually seal the direction. So you're like sealing yourself. So it gives you a real sense of being in your center as an individual and being able to move in the direction you want. The secondary purpose of building up the cube is that it seems to relate to the idea of an inner sanctum or adytum, an inner temple. In the Fama Fraternitatis, the cornerstone document of Rosicrucianism, it's a big allegory, and at some point the brothers find this inner sanctum where the deathless body of their father, the Father Christian Rosenkreuz, is lying, lit by an inner sun. The sanctum has certain dimensions and so on and so forth. So it's also kind of building up that. You do this cube of space meditation, it's building up. Some people think it's to do with the pineal gland, getting the pineal gland to kind of function a little bit different, and that you can use these kinds of meditations to do that. So that's something else I wanted to bring in here. I feel I didn't really bring it in enough in my initial cast on the cube of space. And I think, working with the cube in this manner actually should be a cornerstone practice in Western mysticism. I think it's extremely powerful. Personally, I like to do it with the tarot keys. And that's an extra challenge because the keys are quite complex things to build up in your mind. But, you just keep going and you get better and better at it. Then place them on the cube. I will actually release a meditation doing just that, a guided meditation for anyone who's interested, sometime in the next month or two. I'll record that. If you're desperate to get going and want a bit of guidance, you can check out my book, Opening the Body with a Cube of Space. Find this on Amazon or on my website, bioenergetics.org.uk. And there, I go into, you have 1 week on each of the tarot keys. And then also on the Cube of Space, you learn how to place them and how to kind of usefully visualize this if you want to go on a journey with it. So that's for Cube of Space as a meditative exercise. The second thing I wanted to pick up relates to unfolding the cube. I mentioned this in my original program, but I think more attention can be paid to this. As I said, if you look at the cube and you pay attention to the directions of flow given for each of the 12 edges, which you can get from the work of Dr. Case, particularly his book Tarot Key to a Wisdom of the Ages, or you can just find a version of the Cube of Space online with the directions filled in. You'll notice that the upper face and the eastern face have circular flow. And what that suggests to me is that you can open the cube by this face, east above, which is assigned to key 6, the lovers, and also to the Hebrew letter Zain, which is a sword. So that's kind of a bit of reinforcement that that's a good place to open the cube. And if you open the cube by this edge, you could pull the above face up and pull the eastern and the below face down to make like four up like that, and then pull the southern key to the side this way, the northern key to the side this way to make a crucifix standing up. Hopefully you can visualize that. I did actually try to get AI to make a picture of this, but it failed dismally. Compositionality is a known failing of AI. Handy for other things, but compositionality it's not strong at. So that's one way you can do that. The other way you can do it is from, again, opening of this edge. You could pull the eastern face down to the floor and then pull these two faces, the above and the west, also down to the floor, and then pull the southern face, tilt it on this axis here, the moon, pull it down to the floor, and the northern face, tilt it on this axis here, the hermit, and pull it down to the floor, and you'd have a crucifix shape lying down. It's the second crucifix shape. So something, and you once you've built up this model, in your own mind of the cube using the tarot keys, you can open it up in your mind's eye and, check out how it feels. Also check out where are the keys relating to you now. One of the interesting things you may notice, just to get anyone who wishes to do this started, is that this axis here, which as I said last week is kind of like the temporal axis, in both these ways of opening the cube will now be where your arms are. Whether you're lying down or you're up on your feet as a crucifix. So this again gives some hints about this, I've spoken about the archangels that sit. The tarot archangels are sitting on these axes. Up here, 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 and 7, the chariot is here, and the archangel here. And this relationship, when you open it up, how you're binding and unbinding time. So if you're interested in time as a dimension and transcending time for expanding your now, this again gives you some interesting clues about what might be going on when a cube, which in this sense is almost a 4-dimensional structure, or arguably 5-dimensional structure in Kabbalah, because they're going to chuck in a kind of spiritual moral dimension here and a temporal dimension here, as well as the 6 faces, which are representing 3 spatial dimensions. What happens when you transition from this 3-dimensional cube to the 2-dimensional crucifix, is essentially a transition in how time is experienced. That's the thing that's that's transiting. That's the thing that's changing in this orientation. So it's not like there's a finish line here that it looks like this, but it's more that you can do some meditations on this, and that helps you yourself to get a grasp of how our sense of time can change, and how perhaps some creative agency is giving us this experience of time, but maybe that's not, that's kind of falling down from a higher dimension, and help us to re-enter the upper dimension, more transcendent with respect to time. Okay, so hopefully these 2 points make a bit of sense. I felt like it was a good idea to continue along with the cube of space because, like I say, I feel like it's been underserved significantly in the Western tradition, possibly also in the Jewish tradition. Thank you so much for tuning in. Feel free to check out my content. You can find it on Amazon, Deveraj Sandberg, a strange kind of name, so there's not too many of them around. Easy to find what I've been up to. I do recommend Rabbi Kaplan's book. If you're interested in Kabbalah at all, I think it's awesome because it also gets you started as well with that, and there's a lot of depth in there too. There's a lot of depth. It shows you some of the crazy stuff that Kabbalah asserts, or seemingly crazy stuff to a normal, rational individual. And if I recall correctly, Kaplan actually was some kind of physics professor or mathematics professor or something like this. Quite common of the people who wrote about Kabbalah, that they came from these kind of very academic backgrounds. Feel free also to check out this book, Tarot Key to a Wisdom of the Ages, where you'll find the tarot keys and also quite a bit of info about how they relate to the cube of space. And I think that's me for today. I'll see you back shortly for some more mysticism in the body. Thank you.